Okay, guys, I'm gonna record this one um, for YouTube as well. I've been away for a couple of days, so I thought I'll do one on a Sunday because there's obviously a couple of things that have happened that I haven't really been around for. Um, but obviously nothing really interesting as a whole. So I'm just gonna start off obviously the stream by saying this. So in terms of the action, I've had lots of people ask me already. Is this the bottom? Is this a spring? And I'm just not feeling it still. I think there's nothing really exciting. This move has moved up with very little volume, from the first candle upwards, which basically means lack of follow through. So this morning, I've just put an example in our channel on this particular point, which on the left hand side we've got the Bitcoin daily. On the right hand side, in a little bit darker or behind, we've actually got the Ethereum. And the reason that I've highlighted this is from the all-time high, five obviously here in Bitcoin, and the five slash C here in Ethereum. We've had a pretty interesting move down, although this was a bit more aggressive in Ethereum. We've had the 1-2, which is the equivalent of the 1-2 here. Now, where the software we use, this advanced get, um, was depicting the Ethereum 3 around here. On Bitcoin, we had the 3, right at the first swing down. Now, personally, with a little bit of experience, I personally would prefer to see the count comparable to the Ethereum count on this Bitcoin chart. So I don't agree with this 5 being in. That isn't springy enough for a spring, as I've mentioned a couple of times, and therefore I'd like to see a further move down. We've got regular profit taking on the PTI for Ethereum, and I just think that Bitcoin is a little bit lost at the moment. And although there's some logic as to why um, it's obviously doing what it's doing, I've covered that obviously a couple of times. So just to cover that again, kind of quickly, if we stick on something Weiss related, I'll just stick on Weiss and volume, for example. I'll stick this across to the weekly, and obviously, for you guys that follow me regularly, you would have already seen this several times. But obviously, for you new guys watching the stream, this is how I'm actually seeing and reading where we are at the moment. So, obviously, as a VC investor, I've been involved in Bitcoin since 2011. So, I've kind of played around with this quite a lot. Um, we look at obviously technology investments rather than chart investments, but I've also been a trader for 21 years. So the way that I'm seeing this right now is anything prior to, well, to 2018, 2019, really, we didn't really get much of an uptake in terms of institutional money. And then we had obviously the follow through with the grayscale funds and some other big institutional players kind of jumping on board. So the obvious thing for me is if we assume that we have a three rally year in terms of Elliott wave, then I'm just going to draw a quick box as obviously a three. Okay, so clear as day, that would have to be a three for me in terms of the three high. Now, in a pullback move, you've obviously got the up, down, down, up, ABC, or obviously a slightly more awkward correction. So again, pretty clear that being the two. And given this was the first volume ramped up, then I'm going to identify this as my one. Okay, so if I was to play this out and just put some logic to this, we're going to go into the date range and we're going to say, look, regardless of where, even if I start from the bottom there, right, just to give you a rough idea, on that first move one, right, we're going to come up to the end of this and we're going to say there's 6 months worth of effort in this particular move. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second part is if we move this across now to the start, let's come across to the start of the 2 to 3 move, for example, and we've actually got you know over a year's worth of move just being generic on the 2 to 3 move. Okay, so what makes anyone think that in the 3 to 4 move we're actually going to complete that in 90 days? Bear in mind we've had 6 months, 6 months, and a year. And what you tend to find in Elliott terms, which again I'll just cover really quickly, we spoke about this on multiple streams. you tend to get a move up quite fast, an aggressive pullback too, which is basically the big boys kind of collecting and testing before taking it long. 2 to 3 is where the big boys make some money, from what I would regard then as the 3 to 4 inside the three move bigger time frame. This is where the retail jump in, which is why you end up getting a slightly extended three. You get a pullback four. Now, in terms of the pullback four, quite often four is the longest in terms of the time rather than the price and the depth. So for me, the fact that it can go sideways for several months, makes a lot of sense. There's some logic in the reasoning and thinking behind this, and therefore 4 to 5. So you get an ugly Elliott wave, pattern that looks something like this, then realistically, again, no surprise. So having 6 months, 6 months, a year followed by 90 days doesn't really give me much confidence that we are, ready to shoot off to the moon. So I think for me that's the kind of clear cut logic. We've obviously seen on the bigger picture in terms of where we are. So I think for me, we're still actually in this 3 to 4 move here. I know we've got DXY playing around, which is something else I've covered quite a lot recently. So for me, we're still pretty much bearish, until we're not, and that's kind of how I'm seeing it from a Bitcoin perspective. Now, Bitcoin clearly drives the other currencies and the other coins rather than currencies in terms of things like Ethereum and obviously some of the other altcoins. Everything's correlated to Bitcoin, even if the chart tells you that it's not. A lot of big investors will be looking at Bitcoin almost as an indicator in terms of risk on, risk off type sentiment, and therefore it's going to be a driving factor whether you like it or not. Now, this particular channel, I drew this back, I think it was around the 6th of June, based on a couple of moves. And again, I've just talked about this morning in our channel. So the aggressive pullback here was my starting point. So I'm going to class this as an A move here. Now, although we had this B move, what I was actually looking for is the volume inside this range and obviously where the average volume was actually sitting. So given that we had a few wicks, I actually brought this channel up a little bit and going from an A to what I would regard as the low of these wicks and down to here, sorry, the low of these bodies rather than the wicks, and the low of these wicks here, giving me the primary base for my channel. So I basically had the A, the B, and then ultimately the C. Although I would have liked to have used the C there, again, I was looking for the average in this little cluster here. So we come up with this channel, obviously there. Now, it's very subjective, obviously, but what we were looking at and the reason for it is where the volume was sitting, why, and obviously following the Bitcoin move. I still feel that Ethereum is a couple of days behind. I think that's going to stay the case. I think unless we get something, massive in terms of news where I suppose Ethereum has reason and logic to overtake Bitcoin as a whole in terms of the wave count. I still think this is going to be follow the leader, and obviously the leader still being Bitcoin. So as you can see, we've come down, we've tagged this low. There was some liquidity sitting obviously at these wicks here. There's another little area of interest for me sitting there. So I would like to see a dart down underneath that 1530 level, 1535, on this. So I would like to see another move down. And that obviously is what I'm thinking on the Ethereum side. So if I just stick on the stochastic, let me just see where we are in terms of overbought, oversold. Yeah, so we're obviously well overbought on the daily. We've had a pretty decent move up, but a little bit of divergence on the volume there. So for me, clear cut, down is going to go. We're probably going to suck it in some more longs. Is clearly trying and attempting for the liquidity at this particular point. We might get it, we might get another little false up before the down, but I'd like to see that, moving on down, potentially down to the 1530, 1540 type of region, ideally. I mean, I'm not saying that's where it's going, but that's what I'd like to see it. So Yeah, so that's the logic. I'll jump back across to Bitcoin to finish off on. Um, and again, similar thing in Bitcoin. We've got an overbought situation on the stochastic. The reason I'm using the stochastic over RSI is a lot of people don't realize the RSI is for trending markets. I don't feel this is trending at all, apart from trending sideways. So I think, realistically on the stochastic, we've had a similar view. We've had a nice volume spike here, but the volume actually tapered off days after, giving me no reason or logic to think that this is anything like a spring. Obviously, this level here, I think, was just one sign of weakness, and I think we've actually gone sideways as a whole, rather than anything exciting. Overall. So that's my opinion. That's my logic at the moment for it. This is where I think that we sit in. Let me just check to see if there's anything. Okay, so I guess then on the last one, um, we've actually got what I put on. I put the volume here, and I just used the standard volume just to show this. So if I go back in time a little bit, and the one thing that I've tried to explain again several times, just to show some of the logic. We've gone through the date, the time, we've gone through the sentiment and the position, we've gone through the lack of springiness in the spring. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start at the top and come down practically to the zero level, right? Now, giving me obviously the move, if I can click it, giving me the move is close enough, okay? So the general idea, if we look at the volume on the final drop down, we had massive, massive volumes. I'm going to use that as my 100% range. I know you can stick a moving average on the volume as well, but you have to look at some of these moves. They were only 50% here on the move back up, which was a quick retest. So that gives me confidence that, anything we should be expecting in terms of a decent move up, I'd like to see volume at least surpass this level. Now, we had one year which was the first attempt, which I can see why a lot of people would have said this is the spring, but clear as day, this wasn't the spring. It wasn't, yeah, it wasn't high enough in terms of the volume. Volume has tapered off, obviously, here. We've then gone relatively sideways before it dipped down. Now, we could argue we had a nice little volume spike, but again, if you look at where this is in terms of percentages, it's 20% of that down candle move, and we've actually tapered off. I just give this was clearer to see. We've actually then tapered off from that spike straight back down. So the reality is, we've got this move up, this move down, and although yes, it is moving up slightly there, it's just not enough to what you'd anticipate in terms of being the spring when you are looking at Wyckoff schematics. So I guess that for me is the logic. That obviously is kind of a weekly update as a whole, rather than just being the 10-minute ones that we usually do. I've tried to put a lot more of the logic into this from the educational side. Obviously, guys, this is something that we teach, in a bit more depth in our Discord. But for now, hopefully that covers a lot of the logic, the reason, and the thinking behind why I still feel that this isn't springy enough for a spring. Doesn't feel that we're in the 4 to 5 up move just yet. And obviously with volume tapering, it's just additional confirmation. So yeah, enjoy the rest of the weekend, and we'll obviously have another stream up tomorrow. Cheers, guys.